Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the OPT Network. This morning, we're talking about marriages and how, if you're having challenges in your marriage, you can reset. Statistics tell us that, according to the Centers for Disease Control, there are some 876,000 divorces in the United States each year, and of those, 37% of those couples seeking those relationships and are calling them quits without even getting help. Our guest this morning is a licensed marriage and family therapist. She is an expert, and she has written an amazing book that we believe is really going to aid couples that have been in long-term relationships and those couples who are just starting out. Our guest this morning is Jen Elmquist, and her book is called Relationship Reset: Secrets from a Couples Therapist That Will Revolutionize Your Love for a Lifetime. Jen, good morning and welcome.
Good morning, Carlette. Thanks for having me.
Tough conversation, especially for those people that are those couples that are going through challenges and don't really see any way out. Now, I thought it was interesting that you wrote that the average couple that has relationships problems have had those problems for 6 years before seeking help. Let's talk about why it takes couples so long.
I spent a decade as a couples therapist, and that statistic bothered me the whole time because I saw those couples coming into my office, and I knew that was true, that 6 years was too long because they were worn out, they were stressed out, they were really struggling. Three big concerns of mine was, one, there's still a stigma out there about getting help. So couples don't get help when problems are just starting because they feel embarrassed, they feel like seeing a therapist means somehow they failed, and that keeps them from seeking help with a couples therapist. And two other things which I think are enormous issues is the cost. It's very expensive to see someone, and often insurance does not cover that. And the final issue that keeps people away is just scheduling. The mere, trying to fit into your schedule after work, between dinner, taking care of your kids, that time to not only leave the house and meet with somebody, but the emotional space to expend that energy to dig into stuff with your partner and work things out is, it's very difficult for most couples.
And so when you started thinking about writing this book, and you have talked to many couples, you yourself have been married for well over 2 decades. Why was resetting really important?
I look at reset through a preventive lens. So if we can get on our problems early, or let's say even before problems start, we can get a solid base of education of what is realistic in a couple relationship. What should we expect? What's normal? What's everybody going through? I found that so many couples that would come in and see me were having really normal problems, but they felt isolated because they hadn't talked about them with anybody, or it had been something that had been circling in their own relationship. And as a result, these normal experiences had become big issues between the two of them. And so getting that information to people early resets our expectations. And often if we can reset our expectations, we reset our experience. So there is a preventive lens to getting to people.
And I think in those first probably 1 to 7 years are when couples go through not the most ebb and flow, but that those first 7 years, I know in my experience, were really challenging because each person is trying to find where they fit, trying to come together and still have the autonomy of being their own selves that you write about in the book. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Yes. Well, relationships, just like a child, the child development of where you're a toddler and then you move into childhood and you move into adolescence, you move into an adulthood. We have these developmental stages that we go through. Couples are the same way. We come together, we fall in love, we establish this our us couple, and then we feel the stability of that, and we need to go back to that individual identity, actually that person that made you really exciting and attractive to your partner to begin with. So want to step back into our career. We want to focus on future goals. Oftentimes children are introduced and that becomes a shared goal. And then we get into those years of where we're balancing everything together. Just those changes alone are incredibly taxing on a relationship. Change is a guarantee. We're all going to experience change in our relationship. But change is also extraordinarily difficult because we have to navigate and find new versions of us. And I think you highlight that well. In the first 7 years, a lot of that change is happening for couples. You know, they go from falling in love and having these great moments with each other to having to step into day-to-day life and just the functional tasks of, you know, getting to work in the morning and make sure there's groceries in the fridge and, you know, that they're taking care of their social schedule. That just becomes taxing. And then you have these other pursuits that you're wanting to experience in your life, and then children are coming in. And so we're experiencing all of that often in the first 7 years of a marriage. It's probably one of the most dynamic times of change.
And don't forget about if it happens in the first year, if that couple ends up conceiving in the first year when they really haven't even learned how to necessarily be together with each other, let alone introducing another dynamic into the relationship. So, you know, how do you help couples that are not coming in, that are not really talking about it? And let's face it, especially in that first year, everybody says, oh, are you so happy? And most of the time, if you're honest, you're really not that happy in the first year because you're trying to adjust and you're trying to really see where you fit.
Yes, it's true. Yeah, the first year of marriage can feel that way. The first year of having a child, you know, those times that people expect you to be really joyous and embracing what's going on. I think it's probably twofold at that point. Those changes are normal and they're necessary. You know, they bond you. Even the difficult times do bond couples. You know, having difficulties is not a problem. It's normal.
Right.
And learning how to make it through those difficulties gives your relationship the strength to go the distance. But feeling sometimes like you have to put on this face that everything's great and everything's fine often translates even into your own relationship where you start putting that face on for each other. You know, that, oh, well, I'm fine or I'm feeling fine. And then things get set aside. Conversations don't happen. Arguments don't get resolved or recovered from. And it starts to build that layer where long-term problems can take root.
Absolutely.
So,
I call that resentment.
Yes.
Sometimes resentment can happen over those first few years, and then that's when couples really do need to reset. But if they haven't had great communications, anybody who's been married for any length of time, Jen, talks about communication being the key. If you have not been great communicators, how then do you move into, look, we need to reset so that we're not among those 876,000 people that are statistics of divorce? How do you get there?
So the goal with Relationship Reset was to create a fairly simple format, interactive format that couples could read together or on their own that gave them tools that they could take into their relationship. I put the book into 3 parts. It's core elements, helping couples understand what's normal. Mind benders, which are the things you can do as an individual to be the change in your relationship. We can't change our partners, but we can change ourselves. And then muscle builders, things that research tells us helps couples have strength and stability in their relationship. And the reason I put it into these 3 sections and then small interactive exercises is exactly what you're talking about. Oftentimes when couples get to a place of frustration, they haven't had great communication, they do have resentments or they do have bitterness over what's happened in the relationship, it's overwhelming to try to rehaul the whole relationship. But if you can start with a simple skill like, what can I control on my own? How can I shift my own mindset? How can I change how I'm thinking and in turn then how I'm feeling about the relationship? Because our own ability to regulate, self-regulation, is probably the #1 skill in long-term successful relationships. So we can talk about communication issues, but communication issues are typically bred out of poor self-regulation. So an inability to understand your own emotions, your own thoughts, and then be able to articulate them to your partner in a way that they can accept what you're saying and you explain yourself. So the Mindbenders seek to help people do that.
Hold that thought, Jen. We're going to take a quick break here, but when we come back, we're going to talk about self-regulation and what that really means, and also the core elements that will help us all, if we need to, reset. Stay on point. We're back right after this. Welcome back, everybody, to the OPT Network. Our guest this morning joins us all the way from Minnesota. Her name is Jen Elmquist. She is a licensed marriage and family therapist, and she has written an amazing book. It's called Relationship Reset. And it's so critically important, Jen, because so many people are not seeking help. And so this is an opportunity for people to say, maybe she's talking about me and my relationship. So before we went to break, we were talking about self-regulation, and I want to really stay there because in relationships, especially in the beginning, one partner or the other, maybe both, wants to change the other person and we all want what we want. And so since we know that's not going to happen, trust me, I spent years trying to change my partner. Since we know that's not going to happen, let's help those folks figure it out early.
Yes, and I've been in the same boat as you, Carlette. My husband and I have been together 26 years and actually tell our story in the conclusion of the book of how within our first 3 years we were really burning out. And it was because we didn't have a lot of the basic skills. So many couples come into a relationship and their best models or their best education was what they grew up watching.
Or not watching.
Or not watching. Yes, thank you. Yes. And so our early models are what we carry into our relationship. And there's not a lot of structured opportunity for us to learn how to have healthy, thriving relationships. So in Relationship Reset, when we talk about self-regulation, that's all loaded into the section called Mindbenders. And self-regulation is that ability to understand your own emotions, be able to look at my feelings, understand what I'm thinking, because our emotions come from what we think. And then being able to modify what you think about your partner, about your relationship, so you can shift your experience. It sounds very simple. It's a complicated process because I compare it to any kind of workout you might do in the gym. Self-regulation is an inner workout. You go to the gym and you may start lifting weights, or you may start doing some cardio, and at first it's very difficult. You want to quit. You're sore afterwards. It doesn't feel good. You don't feel success. But if you keep doing those exercises over time, you do have success. You do eventually feel more fit. You can exercise for longer. You feel stronger. You feel more energy. It's good. I think self-regulation is the same way. As we start to understand our emotions and realize, maybe I'm feeling upset with my partner, but if I looked at it differently, if I put myself in their shoes, if I understood it a little bit differently, then I start thinking other things. Like maybe my partner just was having a bad day, or maybe we can shift what's happening in our relationship so I'm not feeling like my partner doesn't care about me in the same way. I need to communicate that to them. That's that exercise of as we shift our thoughts, our feelings start to shift, and we start to feel stronger, emotionally stronger in a relationship.
And I think in order to be able to do that, as you said, it's almost like exercise. Nobody really wants to exercise, and nobody really wants to shift how they feel. Right. Because most people think the way I feel is the way I feel, and it's important to me, and he should understand that. So there has to be a mind shift. And so how do you get people to say, maybe you just have to be more empathetic with your partner? And then I hear people saying, but I am empathetic, and it still doesn't help.
Yes. Well, empathy is key. It is a key trait to successful relationships. And so what I would say to couples is if you're looking and saying, it's hard for me to be empathetic because I'm looking for my partner to understand me. We all would prefer to be understood rather than stretching ourselves to understand.
Absolutely.
It feels so much better. You understand me. What I want to say to couples about that is you actually would have never gotten together and gotten to where you are if you weren't at one point empathetic with each other. those are falling in love skills.
Absolutely.
The skills when I say, everything from I'll put aside my time to I'll put aside my, my own feelings to hear your feelings because I want to woo you. I want you closer to me. I want you to be with me. And so I believe all couples have those skills. We just lose track of them as our relationship becomes more tactical and functional rather than emotional and intimate.
Absolutely. And so one of the things that you talk about is the 6-stage cycle. Mm-hmm. And that's for people who are in committed relationships. And I thought that that was really, really just as important as those core elements. And people that get the book will go through that and read that. But let's talk about that 6-stage cycle, because I thought that was really critical.
Mm-hmm. Yes, the 6-stage cycle, we talked briefly at the beginning of this interview about that, about how a couple relationship develops over time. And how couples meet, they fall in love, it's this wonderful experience, then they move into creating this we couple. It's really the shared world that didn't exist before these two people came together. And then once that feels stable, we often can move out and stretch our own identities. Maybe we want to go back to school, or we want to press our career, or we want to take on some sort of hobby that interests us we haven't done before. I call that the developing time in a couple relationship. It's really where they're building that base, that foundation. They're writing a contract. We're developing our unspoken rules of how this relationship is going to work, how we are going to work together. We have patterns now with each other. And after that developing time, most couples land in something called the we-I plateau, which is where you are spending your years between working on us as a couple and me as a person. And that is the crux of life. Our hope is that in our intimate relationships, the person we're with is as committed to us being the best version of ourselves as we are.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's really, really important at this point in life and in time, because now women are more successful, more assertive, stronger, and you write in one of those the D factor, and I thought that was really important, because oftentimes men say that they want a strong woman, but when she asserts herself as a strong woman, that can create sort of that friction.
Yes, it can create a rub. When I talk about the D factor, that is it often can be a very difficult time in a relationship, but it's very common in individual personal development over the years that you are going to bump into a moment in your relationship where your partner is really wrestling with, who am I? And sometimes that question comes after a crisis, after the death of a parent or a friend, some sort of illness that person may face, where those larger questions about who am I in the world and who do I want to be, does it still fit in this relationship, does it not? And when we think about those traditional marriage vows of, for better or for worse, I think oftentimes we think maybe for worse is something that's happening to both of us.
Right.
Well, sometimes for worse is when one person is really shifting and changing and the relationship is challenged by that type of significant change.
And don't you find, or has it been your experience, because I know I have talked with a lot of my friends who are in those statistics, who got married, had great relationships, families, and then got to that D factor that you write about and say, you know what, it doesn't work for me anymore. I don't love him anymore. We are not the same people. We don't want the same things. But really, if you just give it some time and talk through that, we all grow and change over time.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? I think we just throw out, because things have changed, that it doesn't work for me anymore.
Yes, it's so true. There is a wonderful model. William Bridges did a wonderful model on change called transitions. And he talks about change being the experience that happens between an ending and a new beginning. And during that time, and the D factor is a wonderful example of that, because it is a time of change where a version of a couple is ending and a new version hasn't quite yet begun. And that transition is uncomfortable. I often refer to it as a wool sweater on a wet body. It's just like, I just want to get it off, you know? And I think that's where couples get in the relationship. They're like, oh my gosh, this change is so uncomfortable. I just want to get the relationship off. Just, get it away. Let's just be done. Let's just divorce. You go be happy and I'll go be happy. And I'm not saying sometimes that's not the right choice for couples. Sometimes that is what needs to be done. It's difficult. Staying together and making it through change and divorcing and changing are both extraordinarily difficult things to do.
Let's take a break here, Jim, but when we come back, we'll talk more about how we can get past those feelings and reset. Stay on point. We're back right after this. Welcome back, everybody, to the OPT Network. This morning, we're having one of those really important conversations, and you may be thinking that you're living totally separate lives, but married, and there's no chance for you to reset. But for those people, Jen, what would you say to them? People that have been together and lived together because it's comfortable and sort of live their own separate lives. Is there a chance for those people to reset?
I believe that any couple that at one point fell in love can find each other again, if that's what both people desire. And I think that ultimately is the key. There are things that you can do on your own to be a good and loving partner, to be empathetic, to be patient, to be understanding, to draw your partner in. But the most successful relationships do require reciprocity. If couples are in a place where things they've fallen flat, they feel like they've lost each other, they don't really have the spark or the intimacy that they once did. Relationship Reset, it was written specifically to give them starting places. I give you an example. I was with someone yesterday that had read just one exercise in the back of the book. And she came up to me and she said, I'm not really a reader. And she said, but I opened your book and I read this one chapter where you talk about your grandparents' relationship. And this story is a great reason to get the book in and of itself. But the story I tell about my grandparents' relationship and my grandma's closing words as she passed to my grandpa were, "What about you?" And so often in couple relationships, we ask the question, what about me? And so when we get to those places where we feel that distance, I think what happens is both people are sitting in that place where they're saying, well, what about me?
Right.
What about me in the relationship? I'm not getting what I want. I'm not getting the attention I want, the love I want, the intimacy I want. And if I don't get that, I'm not giving it back. Where a simple starting place, and this is what this woman was saying to me, is I read that and I immediately turned to my partner and I said, well, what about you? What do you need today? She said, I haven't thought, our kids just left for college, we're empty nesters. I haven't thought about asking him that in years.
Wow. What a wake-up call that is. And there are a lot of couples that are empty nesters and that their whole world was centered around what the kids needed, getting the kids to this event and to that thing and all about the kids. And so those are couples that really ideally do need to reset. Now, how do they start to find each other again? Because sometimes it can be, if you've gone through challenging times in your relationship and you feel justified, and I'm not talking necessarily about empty nesters, but I'm talking about people that have gone through affairs or people that have gone through, really hard places, whatever they may be. And, and you've sort of taken your stance. And then it feels awkward to come back and be something that you haven't been to each other. How do you help those people?
Yes.
You know what I'm talking about, Jen?
I do. I know exactly what you're talking about, because those are the layers that over time, when we don't deal with those layers, we may still be together, but all of that hurt is piled up there. And this is going to sound so simple, but there is a deep, deep truth to the concept of forgiveness. And many couples live a lot of years not forgiving each other. I have a chapter on forgiveness where I talk about actually this conversation I once saw between Oprah and Tony Robbins. Literally, it changed my life and it's changed my client's life.
Wow.
But looking at the concept of forgiveness, of being able to hold the hurt in the relationship that's happened to you, examine it, learn from it personally, and be able to thank what's happened to you by saying, thank you, my partner, this experience, for giving me the opportunity to learn how to be better. And I think so often that process, couples forego that process. Mm-hmm. They hold on to grudges because it feels powerful. And then they don't forgive each other. But if they're able together to even start there and say, let's look at the hurts in our relationship. What have they taught us? And maybe what they've taught us is that we are too far apart. And we do need to forgive each other and move on. But maybe what they've taught us is how to have a much better relationship. We have wisdom already sitting in our relationship. We just need to access it.
And so what you're saying, it sounds like what you're saying, Jen, is we take those deficits and we take those hard places and times, and instead of being self-righteous and saying, look at what you did to me, look at how you hurt me, you take that and you say, how can we grow from it? How can this make us better? How can we become stronger? And really, that is easy to say, but we know it's tough. It's tough to do.
It is. It's very tough to do. And so I would say to couples, if you are in that place and you're saying, yep, that is what we need, start by reading the book. That is a great starting place. But the other message, broader message I want to give to couples is, if you can't do it on your own, get help. If you were having a hard time losing weight and it was really important for you, you'd go get help. If you were having a hard time paying your bills and saving money, you would go get help. If your relationship is stuck and you want it to be better, go get help. It is a perfectly normal thing to do, and it will change your relationship.
And so I think you're absolutely on point with that, Jen, but what about those people that say, Jen, I'm with you 100%. I have the women, and I speak as a woman, and they're saying, I want to get help. I've spoken to women, and I said, why don't you guys get counseling? I want to, he doesn't want to. What do you say to those couples?
Yeah. And in those relationships, I would say one person needs to start. So to sit in that relationship in an idle place and say, well, they don't want to, so I can't do anything, that's not true. Start on your own. Start getting your own education. Start making your shifts and changes. And in that, there was a wise therapist that once told me we always have three choices: to stay, to go, or to remain in the status quo.
Wow.
And I believe that every couple faces that choice at some point. It's a pretty normal question to ask in a relationship is, am I going to stay or am I going to go? Or are things just going to stay the way they are? And one person can start to push on the status quo. And that push alone is going to start to shift the relationship. If not shifting the relationship for the other person to join in some sort of action, it's going to shift the relationship for the person that's frustrated to really understand what's going on and what needs to be done for their own greater good. So I do believe action is the key. Momentum follows action.
I love that. And especially I love momentum because it changes the game of life. It changes everything. And if those people who are watching and are among those hundreds of thousands of people that are looking to get a divorce and not really looking for help, I want you to talk about how important self-help is, because we've heard it all the time. Before you can save someone else, you've got to save yourself.
Yes, absolutely. And for people that are moving out of their current relationship, there is so much benefit of doing your own diagnostic, kind of your own autopsy on what didn't work and how is that going to help you grow and prepare for the next relationship. There is another, disturbing divorce statistic out there, and it's that the divorce rate in subsequent marriages is at 73%. And I think so often what people believe is that if I leave this relationship that's not satisfying,
right,
I can just find another one, and changing a partner is going to change everything. And that is not true. You are going to have recurring problems in any relationship that you are in. And So the best thing you can do when you are ending a relationship is to get healthy on your own. Get your own relationship education. You will not only be a much better partner stepping into a next relationship, but you will draw a better partner because you're going to be looking for something else.
And that's what people never really forget or never really remember is that, or understand, is that, you know, that common denominator is you, and you take you into the next relationship. And so until we really do that self-analysis and that self-worth and self-truth, self-work and self-truth, you know, you get much the same. And I think that that's why this book is really so incredibly important, because it really causes each person to look at themselves. Jen, it's an incredible book, and I just believe that so many people are going to start to change their thinking when they open up the pages of the book and start to locate themselves. Thank you so much for joining. It's called, again, Relationship Reset. Tell people how they can get the book, and most importantly, how they can connect with you.
Excellent. The best way to get the book, connect with me on social media, is jenelmquist.com. jenelmquist.com. You can find me.
Thank you so much. I believe that, you know, you are doing the world a greater good by really sharing this message and helping couples. I think that it's going to bless a lot of relationships. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Carlette.
Hey, everybody, stay on point. We're back right after this. Good morning, everybody, and welcome. I'm Carlette Christmas.
And I'm Glenda Stock, and this is our final point today on Point.
Well, Glenda, I don't know if this is apropos or what, that you're about to get married, that we're having all of these conversations about relationships, but all of us that are in relationships should really understand, and we've always said it, marriage relationships are challenging. Well, our guest this morning wrote an incredible book called Relationship Reset, because throughout any relationship, it's going to reset. And it's going to reset probably until you both die. Mm-hmm. And what happens, and what Jen talked about in her book, is that most couples that are having challenges, instead of getting help, they just really throw in the towel.
Sure.
And so her heart for this book is that couples that are having challenges, going through that rough patch, will read the book and know that there are going to be challenges. You can deal with those, and then you can reset the relationship.
Yeah. I love her title, The Reset. Mm-hmm. You know, we do reset with everything nowadays, and it fixes a lot of things. Mm-hmm. So we know that reset's a good word.
Right.
And she uses it, I think, as a great analogy, that it's that preventive step.
Yes.
You know, and taking a preventive look and lens at what's going on in your relationship. Mm-hmm. You know, there's certainly the stigma still that people and couples have, that they're having trouble. You know, and as we have grown and matured, and we can remember a time in our relationship early on, we wouldn't have thought of going to a marriage counselor or sitting down and talking with your pastor or something about maybe a particular bump in the road in your relationship. But it's so needed, and you know, and everyday life takes over. So it's another scheduling issue, particularly if your family is growing, you know, how to work that in. Not to mention sometimes the cost if you're going to a professional.
And that's what she talks about. That. And I don't know, we were a little bit different though, Glenda. When DC and I married early on, we decided, and she talks about this in the book, because we didn't have a model, so to speak, because a lot of people model, you know, you saw your parents.
We repeat what we've seen.
Right.
Sure.
And so we didn't necessarily have that model, because both of us came from divorced families. So we said, you know, if we get in some challenged areas, that we would, you know, seek help and have that. Because I'm going to tell you, this is what happens in relationships all too often. It's my way and your way.
Right.
And then in the middle, there is no room unless you have that mediator that can see both sides objectively and can allow you to see you and your partner to see him.
Right, right. And too often, sometimes the willingness of both partners to seek that help is a huge deficit in a relationship. And we know that occurs creating, you know, kind of a paralysis to recovery to begin with. But her book is filled, I think, with great knowledge and wisdom, and she uses her and her husband's example so well and makes it real. She's walked in these shoes and understands it, along with many of her case studies. But I like the fact that she gives us specifics about what we can do. You know, so often we read these books and it's filled with theory and you know,
right.
but she gives us specific things. I love the muscle builder of making your kiss more than 6 seconds. I love that one. I like that. I'm gonna try that.
And absolutely, because
Yeah.
how often do we get in relationships and we
Sure,
forget to kiss,
sure.
or we just have the peck,
Sure.
and we move on,
Sure. It's so easy because life takes over.
and you'll lose that
know?
intimacy.
Yes.
You know,
And-
that thing that made your heart palpitate in the beginning, it becomes common.
Right.
You know?
Exactly. Yeah.
And so
yeah.
it takes both parties or one person
Yeah.
to initiate even the touch.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Sometimes we lose touch, the actual physical touch with our partner. And I'm going to tell you, over time, when you start letting that slide and letting this slide, then before you know it, you're looking at that person.
You've lost the magic, and you've lost that magic that put you together to begin with. And I've heard, you know, probably more men say this than women, and I don't want to sound sexist here, but, you know, if I have to be told to kiss you, or if I have to be reminded, you know, that becomes a staged situation. But, you know, in reality, again, health issues begin to prevail. I think about, you know, maturing adults and
Yes.
maturing couples and things that begin to occur that makes us more mindful of each other's physical limitations,
Right.
maybe, in that regard. But as pointed out in our book, there's so many ways to show that affection and to show that care and concern. And so often and many times, that is just as fulfilling,
Right.
you know, as,
Right.
as an intimate sex life, is really having those moments of sharing and those emotional
Right.
sharings and touchings and words and small notes and small gestures and kind acts and the things
Right.
that we know can make such a huge statement in relationship. And, you know, when all of the smoke and mirrors are gone, those are the things that get us through. And help us to maintain a healthy, vibrant relationship, one that we look forward to going home to share time
Right.
with that person.
Right.
And I think, to me, that's one of the greatest measures of a good relationship is do we really look forward to our time at the end of the day?
Right.
And is there something that we know we are going to be able to do or discuss or talk about that becomes our quality time? And I think that's just a beautiful way to kind of check yourself sometimes, really, on where you are.
Absolutely.
You know, if you continue to find yourself wanting to do other things
Or not wanting to go home.
or not wanting to go home, it's a pretty big red flag.
Right. And the beauty of this is that you may be in a situation where you're not looking forward to going home at the end of the day, you know, to be with your partner. But that's when you really know, Glenda, you've got to reset. Because if that continues, then the gap just gets wider and wider.
Right. You know, her analogy of sharing her story about her grandmother asking her grandfather as she was passing, what about you?
What about you?
And too often we simply don't have enough empathy and we don't put the other person first. I think we'll see great changes in our relationships if we're able to always put the other person first.
Good last words. We're out of time for now. I'm Carlette Christmas.
And I'm Glenda Stock, and this has been our final point today on Point.
Stay with us, everybody. We're back to wrap up right after this.